Okay. Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Testing. Okay. Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That sounds good.
Doesn't sound too
Yeah,
bad.
well, you're still getting some feedback. See?
Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That sounds good.
Yeah. Plug that microphone.
You hear all that feedback stuff? Bouncing all around.
Testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
You hear all that feedback stuff? Bouncing all around.
That's really high pitch.
It is. Sounds very alien.
That microphone got damaged. Really mechanically. Testing. 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 When in the course of human events. Testing. 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 When in the course of human events. Where did that rock go?
No, listen to that. There's something that's replaying itself over the top of itself. Well, it could because you still have that up.
Yeah.
There's something that's replaying itself over the top of itself.
Okay, how does that sound now, Maria, out there in internet land?
Did you see your Spider-Woman images on the altar tonight?
Okay, Maria says it sounds great, so we're going to continue.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Wow, cool.
Yeah, I like that. That's beautiful.
Couldn't see it from this angle. That's really, thank you.
Okay, I think we're back. I apologize for the delay. Anybody who wants to watch this, we're going to have to obviously edit out some stuff for the people who watch it later. So, the key thing about the Toltecs is The Toltecs were not necessarily a race. You've heard me say that.
The culture.
It's not one tribe. They weren't all the same genetic stock like Scotsmen or Vikings or Jewish people or anything. The oral tradition says that at its peak there were people from at least 5 continents here. In the what?
I need you to move forward because you're messing with the curtains.
Oh, okay. We got to do something different there because I have to be able to lean back. So,
Move the table.
that fact confuses academia. And by academia, I mean any of the official ologies that are out there, archaeology and anthropology and historical ology and so forth. The world of human knowledge has been over-compartmentalized to the point where most academic disciplines talk to each other very little or not at all. Unless there's some reason they want to cover up information, then they seem to talk really well. So the Toltec, the first big mistake the historians and academia, I'm going to just lump it into the whole academic world and call it academia. The biggest thing they're doing wrong right now is to assume that the Toltecs only existed in that finite 150-year period or so from the fall of the last Toltec king until the about 150-year period. From it started there and went forward, and then at some point they just all disintegrated. They give credit for between 100 and 200-year period, and that's the Toltec era. And yeah, that's when human sacrifice had started. That's what actually broke up the Toltec Empire. Most of North American history, however, the Toltecs were not the ruling class. That came late. They were this priesthood class that you talked about. They were the scientists and the healers. They were the men and women of knowledge. And you could think of them like a guild. They were the geeks and nerds of their day. Because they had all the cool stuff. They had the knowledge. They had the energy, the power. They had the secrets for spiritual transformation and transcendence. They knew how to build the really cool archaeological stuff, the pyramids, the chambers of transformation. They knew how to heal people. They knew how to regulate and order society for optimal development of human potential. Over time, some of the translations or meanings were, yeah, like the master builders, the master craftsmen, the master artisans. Those still are kind of just descriptions of things the Toltecs did. That higher level knowledge that their guild held, the kind of the guild of nerds, we'll call them. This group of people who held this knowledge were concerned primarily about transcending this world. So mundane things like the stock market or the sports scores or Hollywood movies. Only they didn't have Hollywood movies back then. It was probably something else. They really didn't care. So this knowledge was the key, because what it did, it came to mean, the term Toltec came to mean the complete human. A human who had completed a certain amount of transcendence work. We see this much later. And in other places that had their sources in the same place, like Atlantis. So in Egypt, there was a big difference between those who had graduated from the mystery schools and those who were just out working as bricklayers or farmers or camel herders or whatever else went on in Egyptian culture and society. So there was this acknowledgement that there was something more. It wasn't just, you didn't just slap bricks together and make a pyramid. There was this knowledge of a higher level knowledge that was held by the Toltecs. So it didn't only imply a mastery over science and a mastery over healing. It also implied a level of mastery over oneself and mastery over certain forces of the universe. Is there a question?
My question.
Yeah.
So when you said that the Toltec, when you say that the Toltec were primarily concerned with transcendence, I wondered if you could distinguish between transcendence and ascendance. You know, as if like in the I am activity that they're all trying to just shift out, versus are we transcending this, or are we causing this to transcend, more like the consciousness of humanity being raised?
That's a good question.
Yes.
Okay. Thank
you. The concept of transcendence, there's a lot of cultures and philosophical systems that acknowledge that what we're looking at here is an illusion. I know if I pick up this hunk of obsidian and drop it on your toe, you're going to say, that wasn't an illusion. But if you remember that your toe is an illusion, then you go, oh, that's just all part of the illusion. So the concept of transcendence includes this awareness of that there are the existence of higher planes. That this isn't the whole universe. And that we can take our knowledge in other places. We can take our consciousness and send it other places. But ultimately the goal, by working with groups, is to literally raise our frequency to match a higher frequency, whether you want to call that a higher plane, a higher dimension, a higher world. Evolution isn't done, and that means humanity as a whole, the world as a whole, each individual. The slow way of doing it is lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, the Groundhog Day process. That's the slow way that most people get to, and then they just keep doing that. But there's faster ways. You can do many lifetimes all at once, especially if you start living them in parallel, consciously. And the goal is to take conscious control of forces that would otherwise just happen to you. So when we're trying to transcend this world, we're trying to, it's on the one hand, we're trying to do our will, right? Which our will is to greatly accelerate the evolution of each of us and humanity as a whole, so that we collectively and individually can be capable of greater things. Now, the religion that you refer to, called the I Am activity, is a group that has most of its activity here in the Mount Shasta region and in Chicago. There's debate. Was it founded here? Was it founded in Chicago? When you read their own literature, it pretty much makes it clear it was founded here by people from Chicago. So I think you're splitting hairs if you argue where it is. Where was it founded? It's controlled out of Chicago. I'm not a member, so I'm not an expert. But the focus is on ascension and working towards becoming an ascended master, where you don't have to engage in the karmic rebirth process, and you're up at the level of an ascended being, and then you can do bigger, greater, more glorious things than you can as a human on the path of karmic rebirth. That's the theory. What I see is that their doctrines, as originated by their founders back in the 1930s, is got some good things in it. They acknowledge God. They acknowledge higher level beings. They acknowledge the ascended masters are trying to live a pure life.
Authoritative prayer.
They engage in authoritative prayer. They doing their best they know how to command the forces of their universe. Some of the limitations I see them engaging in is that now that they're here on stage, they're trying to get out of here as fast as possible. They're trying to ascend now, right here, right now, today, if they could. They all would. But that's not why we're here. We're here to do something that can only be done here. And so, on the one hand, the Malkuthian world is the pinnacle of what the universe has tried to create. You know, that force flows down. Moved my thing out today while we were cleaning, but the forces are flowing down to create Malkuth. This is the kingdom. This is what the rest of the universe has conspired to create. And in terms of extending creation, that needs to be done here. It's all planned in the higher planes, and then it goes through the higher spiritual planes, through the causal plane, the mental plane, astral, etheric, and then down here into the physical. So on the one hand, ascension, this is subtle, and I hope I can explain what I understand. Ascension is, in a way, trying to get out of here. They're not engaging in the process of being in Malkuth, whereas transcendence is the idea of mastering Malkuth, mastering the forces of this realm, mastering the forces of your destiny. And once you do that, everything is possible. Does that make sense, and does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you.
So this idea of the Toltec, the ideal Toltec, is that ideal human who has done all that, who has mastered the forces of this world, and doesn't have to be here, but may choose to remain. I know someone who's doing it. Not me.
He's out of here.
No, not yet. My agreement is I'm going to stay here as long as I need to get done what I came here to do. And then I'm not here. I'm not coming back.
They might die a old bit.
Are you implying it's going to take me that long?
No,
It just depends on the level of your students.
it depends
Or the
how many
work.
people that you want in the pods to
Yeah.
achieve this mastery.
No, we can all do that better by working in groups. That's for sure. Absolutely. So that's what the Toltecs have always done. So that definition is probably, of all the things the Toltecs ever did or ever were about, that one subtle definition of the human, who has mastered the world, that ideal quintessential human, that's the one that's most overlooked when you read any academic treatise or article or textbook about the Toltecs. I don't even know if it's in any of them.
But that's what the legends say. That's what the Aztecs and the Mayans say.
Right, but that's what the academia has thrown out.
Because they don't want them to be the masters of the world. We're the masters of the world now, academia says.
Right, so academia throws out anything that they declare to be mythological. And they declare anything to be mythological that wasn't written down or carved in stone or engraved in a metal plate.
Even if it was, they throw it out.
And sometimes even if it was, they throw it out. Well, because why?
It's fiction.
It can't possibly be true.
Right.
Well, also too, they can misread the script of whatever it's on.
Oh,
they do all the time.
They do that all the time, often deliberately, but just in the very narrow sliver of information about the past on this planet that pertains to the Toltecs, there are multiple examples of academia being proven wrong by declaring something to be mythological until somebody goes and digs it up and proves that it was really there, like Troy, like Atlantis. Atlantis has been found. We have pyramids underwater, we have major cities underwater, we have all this stuff underwater. Of course, you can't get in your car and drive there, so it's easy to declare, oh, no, that's not possibly true. There's similar things in the Pacific.
Unless you have mastery of your car.
So,
That's some mastery.
so
I was just gonna say, where I saw it a lot is I had to study quite a bit of anthropology for my graduate degree, and so what I found in the anthropological records is like, okay, so these people, these scientists say, oh, I want to go study these people because I think they're cool and neat, and they go and they infiltrate their society, and they start writing everything down, and they see that these people believe in magic, that they believe in a spiritual system, that they believe that they can, have an influence, let's say, in the dreaming and things like that, and yet it's all kind of like their superstitious beliefs. It's not like, even though they're going to study these people, they don't believe that these people really can do these things or have these impacts, or and in a few minor cases, they get sucked in. You know, they start practicing with the shaman, or they start practicing the magic, and you know, in a few cases, you see the scientists turn, you know, guru, but very, very few. Most of them always write in the aspect of this is what they believe, but we don't believe it's true.
Isn't it quaint? Look at the quaint beliefs of these ignorant savages who, whatever. You know.
Or even the fairies, you know, it's like those are alive and well in Ireland.
Yeah. And here, if people knew how to look and knew how to communicate with them, of course, why would they want to? You know, why would these spiritual beings want to communicate with most humans? Right. So later, the word Toltec, after the fall of the Toltec culture and after Sayacatl left, the word kind of devolved to mean any city dweller. You had the people who dwelt in cities, you had the people who dwelt in the country. The city dwellers were Toltecs, the country dwellers were the Chichimecas, and the word had morphed again. And so when you look at the early Spanish who arrived and started conquering peoples because they were under mandate from the Roman Catholic Church to conquer and subjugate and bring into Christendom everybody out there, and yes, by force if necessary. As an aside, if you have to force people under threat of violence to believe in your religion, maybe your religion isn't that good.
Here, here.
Yes.
Huh. Yeah.
Food for thought.
But anyway, they tried to either bring them in or kill them. And so they looked at the time and they heard the stories from the Aztecs and Mayans. And they said, oh, these great ruins, they were built by the Toltecs. And oh, these great wonderful things were built by the Toltecs. And that was Toltec knowledge, Toltec everywhere they looked. Though at the time in the culture, it was confusing because the word Toltec, now this was 500 years after the fall of the last major Toltec cities. So 500 years later, it's just, oh yeah, Toltec just means somebody who lives in a city. You know, like with the way we might use the word suburbanite. You know, doesn't necessarily mean that suburbanite has any great and wonderful knowledge. It just means where they live. And so we're further hampered by the fact that the Toltecs didn't use a conventional form of writing. Not much of it anyway. They put most of their information into their artwork. And they used the energy, which at that time was still called just the power. And information was encoded in the art. So there's layers and layers and layers of how the artwork could be interpreted, and it could pass on knowledge and information, which is what writing does. So that, of course, will frustrate even the serious, legitimate historians who are trying to be accurate. Because by definition, history is the study of things that were written down. That's the way academia defines it. If it wasn't written down, it's not history, it's prehistory. And therefore, it's mythological, and therefore it didn't happen. If those pyramids didn't build themselves, somebody actually did it. So this idea that anything of value had to have been written down, and if it wasn't written down, it wasn't of value. That is purely a product of modern academia. Some of this started around the time of World War II. World War II, in many ways, in American and European culture, and even in certain Asian cultures, World War II was the great social dividing point. Yes, it was about a 10-year process. Then when you back up to the end of World War I, really, World War I and World War II are one war with a long truce in the middle. And it needs to be analyzed as that. But the ending of World War II was the great social divide in a lot of ways. And one of the ways, which is very, very, very subtle, but extremely crucial to understand, is the way in which the Allied forces, especially Great Britain and the United States, developed certain key pieces of technology during the war. Prior to that point, prior to World War II,
I'm making more water.
I don't need more water, I just need more of that pot at some point. The average scientist, the average engineer did their research in a lab with one or two people and maybe a couple of technicians. And that's how research was done. And so in order to work in that environment, because it was done that way because budgets were small. If you got a grant that would pay for one or two people, that was a big grant. So you had your salary at the university, and if you had some extra money and you had a technician working for you, oh man, you were up the social ladder because you could hire somebody. But then World War II came along, and we needed to develop a lot of technology in a hurry. So these guys who had to be experts on everything, every aspect, they had to know machining, they had to know electronics, they had to know, well, they didn't have really electronics, they had electricity. They had to know every aspect of many different disciplines. So what they did in the two big projects in the United States, which were incredibly successful at doing a lot of research in a short period of time. One was called the Manhattan Project, which developed
Manhattan.
No,
The bomb.
the bomb.
the atomic bomb. Exactly. And the other was called the Rad Lab. Probably haven't heard of the Rad Lab.
Mm-mm.
The Rad Lab was run out of MIT, and it developed radar.
Mm-hmm.
So the way these big projects work to get so much success in a short period of time was they threw a whole bunch of these experts in every field, not just a jack of all trades, master of none. These men and women were masters of all trades. And they threw them into a big room and said, we need to go from point A to point B yesterday. How do we get there? I'm saying that very tongue-in-cheek, but partly seriously, which I'll come back to. So if I don't come back to that get there yesterday thing, remind me. So what they did was they used Julius Caesar's approach that he had borrowed from King Philip of Macedonia, who was the father of Alexander the Great, which was to divide and to conquer. So they took these two or three people and said, you're going to work on just this one aspect, and these two or three people, you're going to work on this one other aspect. And so they divided the whole into logical parts, and they did focused research. And every little group would get to a point and they would make a change in something. They'd say, oh, that's going to affect the power people down the hall. I need them to give me a different kind of power output. They'd grab their design, they'd walk across the hall and say, hey, Joe Blow power designer, here's what we came up with, this is what we need you to do. And Joe Blow would say, oh, yeah, we can do that. Hey, gang, come here. And his gang would be like 2 or 3 people. They'd scribble and they'd all take notes. And they got a lot done in a short period of time because everybody knew what the others needed. And they all knew how to do all the other jobs, but they were focused on this one here and the interfaces in between. And we went from radar being a curious anomaly that was accidentally discovered when they were trying to send radio communication signals across a channel. And every time a ship went by in the way, it would break the communication. Like, oh, I just lost data. What's going on? And they'd look out the window. Oh, there's a ship in the way. Huh. And one thing led to another, and then they learned that they could deliberately bounce radio signals off the ship to find out where the ship was. And then they found they could do the same thing with aircraft. And so, in an incredibly short period of time, I don't remember exactly what, but like a year or less, all of a sudden we had radar, where you could put a big radar antenna up on top of a mountain, and you could scan for hundreds of miles around. You'd know if an enemy was coming. And so that's what they did. They had one in Hawaii, on a mountain just outside Pearl Harbor. They had it there in 1941. We had technicians watching the screen on the morning of December 7th, 1941. And those technicians saw hundreds of planes approaching. And they picked up the phone and they called headquarters. And headquarters said, ignore it.
It's a figment of your imagination.
Here they have the technology and they ignore
That
it.
literally happened. But in terms of developing the technology, the techno nerds did a really good job. These are like modern Toltecs who did that. They didn't know they were being like modern Toltecs, but they were. And then, of course, atomic bomb. There's a lot of history out there. A lot of movies made about that. Nobody's ever made a movie about the Rad Lab and all the things that happened in World War II because we had radar. It's boring. Only geeks like it. So we had that, and it was so wildly successful that every technology development program since has used that compartmentalized model as their new standard. Except something funny and curious has happened. Can you guess what it is?
They've used it to isolate the different groups rather than allowing them to know what the other groups are doing and helping each other. So,
That is a big part of it.
so like
It's-
one group is completely unaware and they only know what they're told.
That's half of it.
That's
That-
why
that one half of the major modern problems in this model.
that's why the archaeologists and the historians are so screwed up with the dates and
Yeah,
everything.
exactly. The other half, which is just as important, is the fact that the people they're throwing into this model are no longer experts at everything.
Right.
They're lucky if they're experts at one thing. They're not even jack of all trades and master of none. They're lucky to be a jack of one trade, not even a master of just. They're lucky to know the bare minimum about one thing, and they're thrown into this environment. And I saw this firsthand when I was working in aerospace. And then I've talked to friends in other industries, and it's the same story. And so that model is broken. And in academia, it shows up exactly like what you said. They don't talk to each other.
Well, I was thinking of aerospace too, and I was
Yeah.
thinking of some of these more conspiracy things, like, you know, let's say with the environmental scientists right now, they may be told, hey, we're having global warming and we need you to save the world by chemtrailing everything so that we can save the world. And they go out seriously thinking that that's all the data that there is, and that's
Yeah.
what's really happening, and so they think they're doing a good job, and yet at the same time they don't have all the information.
Yeah, it's deliberate misinformation. The there was in the mid to late 1990s into the early 2000s, there was a famous investigative reporting news program called the X-Files. And the term they used on the X-Files was confuse, inveigle, and obfuscate. And that's what they did. They deliberately confuse, inveigle, and obfuscate. And so that's what academia is engaged in. And you go from 1,500 years of Toltec history down to 150. Which, this one I've read in at least 2 sources. And it may have been more than that. I finally clocked it, right? But the Toltec Empire started with the fall of the last Toltec king. You've had some academic background. Does that make sense?
No. No,
Thank
not at
you.
all.
I'm not the only one.
Not at all.
Yeah. So 1,500 years down to 150. The estimates are always 100 to 200, so I just kind of round it off to 150. And that is, thank you, musical teacups. That's the problem that virtually all North American history and the study thereof is facing. So what I care about, though, isn't that academia is messed up in a big, big way. It is. And as soon as I'm made king for the day,
He has a list.
I have a list.
He will not sleep for that
First
day.
thing, when I'm king for the day, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to extend my reign. Because I know that the second item on my list is going to take longer than a day. And the second thing on my list is not to fix academia. I'm going to draw that one out because that one's going to be fun. No, the second thing on my list is to outlaw speed bumps.
Oh, I'm liking that.
When I lived in Southern California, there was a time I lived in a particular neighborhood in the city of Redondo Beach. The Round Beach, which is as straight and flat as you can imagine. How it got the name of Redondo, I don't know.
Someone
I
was
even went to the
confused.
local history museum, and nobody there knew. I was like, okay, how did the city get its name? And these are the kind of things that are on my radar. Like, we live in, or just outside, Mount Shasta City. When you look in the California document, official names of towns, this is Mount Shasta City. 3 words is the official name of our town. It was called that because Mr. Brown, who owned a huge ranch over here west of town, had the vision to take about 6 little tiny villages within about a 3-mile radius and combine them into one town under one name. And the main town, near where downtown Mount Shasta City is, was called Sisson, S-I-S-S-O-N, which was named after another early pioneer settler of this area. And he said, no, 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 no. because the railroad had come through, a highway was coming through, and he was looking at the map, and all around Mount Shasta were these little tiny villages, all randomly named something else. So he put a ballot measure out for the locals, and he had a huge campaign based on finances and economic growth for the region, and they changed the name from Sisson to Mount Shasta City, expecting it to grow big, which it never really did. It used to be a lot bigger than now, but that's another story for another day. So he changed the name, Mount Shasta City. My father, up in Washington State, is the president of a historical society museum that he spent the last 14 years raising the money to build with a whole lot of other folks, and they did it. So there's this idea that, yeah, you can, if you're historically aware and historically astute, you can actually manipulate the future.
Oh.
So that's what academia is trying to do. They're trying to erase some past. And they're trying to eliminate knowledge of what the Toltecs held. Some of my other writings, I've called it the Great Toltec Historical Conspiracy. So when you have this idea of a complete human, and all that that implies, the self-mastery, mastery over the forces of Malkuth, the physical world, the island of the Tonal, to use the Toltec terminology. You're implying a mastery basically over a significant portion of the Kabbalistic tree of life, what we now call the Kabbalistic tree of life. The 10 spheres, the 22 paths, and the 3 pillars. Kabbalistic language calls it the pillar of wisdom. The pillar of beauty or mercy, the pillar of strength or severity. In the Toltec parlance, we call that the 3 aspects of a Toltec warrior: the dreamer, the stalker, and the warrior. So the pillar of beauty, or the center pillar on the tree of life, would correspond to the dreamer. And the pillar of strength, or the pillar of severity, would correspond to the warrior aspect. And the pillar of wisdom corresponds to the stalker. The first thing you have to do on that, with that body of knowledge, that to control yourself, is to know yourself and to be ruthlessly honest. You didn't just kick the tripod, did you? I didn't just accidentally see it move, did I? How's that view?
She did in fact kick it, but it's okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
No flogging.
Not today.
Spankings afterwards.
Oh.
And
We
now,
do have to charge extra for that.
pick me.
Later. No.
You know
I
that.
was like, that brought a big
No, it's a-
smile.
That's Monty Python, you guys.
Castle anthrax.
It still brought a smile.
You have to take control through discipline, through your attention, of your little universe. And this is a constant process of iteration. We all develop what's sometimes called a body of habits. The body of habits can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. We can have supposedly bad habits, drinking or smoking, swearing. If you do them all day, every day, yeah, that's probably bad, especially if you're not countering those forces with their opposite. If you're an otherwise good person and you hit your nail with, you're trying to drive a nail and you hit your thumb with a hammer and you happen to let a swear word slip and you say, oh darn, I shouldn't have said that. And you go on with life and put ice on your thumb, maybe a bandage, or a cast if you just shattered the bone. Then it's not really a habit at that point, right? But even good habits, like meditation. How many times have I told you you need to meditate, you need to journal, you need to write your dreams down, blah, blah, blah.
Once. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, that actually is an accurate answer. I have told you it once, and once, and once, and once again, and once again, and once again. So you're rushing home from work, and you come around the corner, you're a block away from home, and you're looking at your clock, I gotta get there and meditate. I'm supposed to meditate at 5 o'clock every night. I made a will statement. Come around the corner and somebody else, a bicyclist, just got hit by another car and they're laying on the ground bleeding and they might die. And you stop and you look out and say, hold on, stop bleeding. I have to go home and meditate because I made a commitment and it's my good habit. And as soon as I'm done meditating, I'll be back in 15 minutes to save your life. And off you go to meditate because that's your habit. That may not be a good use of a habit. Habits are supposed to serve you and the greater good. Becomes regular. I was talking with a woman last week who's an acquaintance. Don't know her well, but through other friends. And it was day 91 she'd gone since she quit smoking and hadn't had a cigarette. And I thought that was really interesting because lots and lots of psychological studies say it takes 90 days to make a habit. So she was focusing on, it's only been 91 days, and I was like, wait, that's good. And I explained, psychologists say, once you can do a new behavior, a new pattern for 90 days, it's now a habit. And that becomes your art. And she looked at me and she'd never heard that before, and she just thought that was wonderful because now not smoking is her habit rather than smoking. She's like, oh, okay. So she thought that was good. And it is. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So this body of habits requires constant monitoring. It requires us to be moving in the direction of being awake. So even if something's a habit, if we're doing it because we're asleep, and we've just trained the machine to do that, that isn't necessarily as effective as doing the habit while you're awake. This is that day to day, moment by moment saying not only what I want to do, but why. Holding that intent. Little things around your home, around your life, around your workplaces. You need to have an awareness, a level of knowledge in your conscious mind of what your larger intent is and why you're doing the habit. It's not a habit.
That kind of sounds like some of the positive and negative aspects of ritual. So, because of all the ritual that was happening in, the early church, people are just mindlessly doing what they were told over and over and over again. And so we broke with that in the Protestant religions, and now there's no ritual at all. And so there seems to be this, sterileness now of the richness of ceremony and so forth, because we've thrown out the baby with the bathwater, but at the same time, we don't really put the thought into those things that should have been thought about when we do ritual.
That's a really interesting point you're making that I'm going to expand on. Recently, earlier this year, I can't tell you how many months ago, Bonnie and I read a novel that was given to us by a relative. It was written about a historical period in the late 1300s, and it was set in Great Britain primarily, but also in Europe. And the key protagonists are ancient ancestors of ours. So it's a historical novel that was well researched and well factual, and it had bedroom scenes and conversations that nobody knows for sure if it happened, but all the major historical events in this novel actually happened, and they were performed by some of our ancestors. It was a very powerful read. And do you remember that little part in there when they're out at her knight's castle, and the pastor of the church comes over, he's trying to perform ritual. And it's not that's not the mass they said in Latin every day. It's some of the ones they didn't do very often. I don't know if it was around a holiday, whatever. And he could barely do it, and he didn't know what any of the words meant. And so that's an example of what you're talking about. Is they're walking through serving Mass completely blindly. They blah 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 smack. It reminds me of that Monty Python. Oh, with their little boards on their head, and they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're saying. They don't know why. The purpose of ritual is severalfold. One of them is the intent of the ritual, at least should be, to modify forces of the universe, to create an effect here in Malkuth, which is a very loose definition. So you go out and you start your car and go away. You're modifying the forces of the universe to change Malkuth. I think a lot of what passes for science nowadays, in days gone by, would have been considered a magical ritual. picking up my ritual box and communicating with somebody on the other side of the world would have been considered impossible unless you were using magic.
Burn him, he's a witch.
Yeah.
That's right.
You know, it's always interesting. You've got all these quotes in the Bible about how faith in Christ can accomplish miracles. But as soon as somebody starts doing that, they accuse them of
no, right.
channeling the forces of dark.
Mm-hmm.
Burn him, kill him, or her. A lot of hers got
A
killed.
lot of hers.
That's because only he has the power, nobody else does.
So, usually when we're talking about a spiritual ritual, a religious ritual, a magical ritual, whatever term you want to use, I look at those three almost interchangeably. You're talking about forces from the unseen planes that don't exist according to academia. Oh wait, the physicists have equations for them. Oh, but let's ignore them. Okay. The forces from these unseen planes manipulate them to change something going on here on this plane. So that's one thing that is the purpose of a ritual. So in order to perform something like that, you have to learn how to manipulate the forces of the unseen planes, which means you need to know about the unseen planes, you need to know what forces there are to be manipulated, you need to know how to manipulate each of those forces, and somewhere in there you need to have some kind of a clue about what it is you're trying to accomplish. Excuse me. Because that is again going to go back upstream and decide which forces, how, and so on. There's another major aspect of the purposes of ritual, and this one is very, very, very often overlooked, which is by learning all of that process, the biggest change you're trying to accomplish is on the person performing the ritual. When you learn where the forces come from, what the forces are, how to control them, what sequence to do certain aspects in, and you practice it and you repeat it and you practice it and you repeat it, and you've learned new languages, you've learned a whole new art, you've learned a whole new field of science, you are undergoing transformation.
Mm.
And the process of learning all that is part of how we are transformed.
It kind of reminds me of the reading of the ABD. You know, you're doing it supposedly for these individuals going through their transition process.
Mm.
And yet, at the same time, you're preparing yourself to go through that same process.
Mm-hmm.
And by doing it over and over and over again, you develop this body of habits
That
then
will carry you through.
that will carry you
Yeah,
through when you get to that point.
Dalai Lama says that he does this practice that is for death, to
Yeah,
help you with the death thing. So he says, when I die, I'll still be doing this practice,
Yeah.
and I'll be doing it better. And
And-
it's mastery of that practice that allows you to die, he says.
He's referring to the Tibetan Book of the Dead and reading it. And that's, when she talks about the ABD, the American Book of the Dead, it's not just a translation. The author went and meditated, and he's a shaman, and went to those spaces, all the chambers of the Bardos, and reinterpreted what's there and put it into American language. Because the old Tibetan language is like, we don't know what the five-headed green-eyed monster is. We don't have thousands of years of mythological stories in our culture to explain to us what each one of those things mean. But the boogeyman, we know what the boogeyman is,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And so on throughout the entire ABD. So, yeah, we do that in the specific case of the ABD, which is the same thing that Dalai Lama is doing, and everyone should be doing. Everyone needs to read the ABD, just like everyone needs to have the Ikadua. The Ikadu energy. We taught a class this last week. This is an aside. Down in San Ramon, outside the Bay Area. And 15 people got level 1. An amazing group. Amazing people. They're all on a path. They're all working at being awake, and they're working at mastering forces and of the universe, trying to take control of their lives. They're needing on an ongoing basis, these people have been getting together and doing things and learning things. It's a very nice little community they have that they built for themselves. And one or two of them stumbled into Mount Shasta and met John Kirby, the wand maker. And he shared with them the basic information about the Ikadua, gave them one of my books. They went back, contacted me, and said, could you come down and do a class? Twist my arm, right?
Mhm.
And so we signed up. We said we need at least 10 to go down there, and then 3 days later they had 14 people. We ended up doing a class for 15. And when we got there, we found out that all of them except one, and this was the one who had registered like the day before, had already bought my book and read it and were starting to do the exercises. And they didn't even have the Ikadua yet. Not that you have to have the Ikadua to do those exercises, but that's a level of engagement that is an outstanding prognosis for their growth and potential. To think that they did that. I didn't tell them they had to buy my book. One of the people already had it, and I don't know if they all shared and passed one copy around or how many they may have bought online, but 14 out of the 15 had read it before we even had the class. It was just amazing to see that level of engagement. That's what it takes to master this world, to master the forces of Malkuth. You have to make this a priority if you want to succeed. Otherwise, yeah, you're back there blindly on the karmic rebirth cycle. But this idea of ritual is extremely crucial. In the Toltec lineage, there's 4 main aspects of that we are taught and we're trained and that we have to master. And this process of doing that is very, very, very self-driven. In Toltecs, the 4 main aspects we have to master pertain to ritual. We have the red magic, we have the black magic, we have the white magic, and we have the green magic. So master those, and you're well on your way.
Will they just reveal themselves to us?
Oh, you want to know more about them? Oh,
It could be helpful.
guess the old adage says, I think I read it somewhere, ask and you shall receive. So she asked, so I guess I'll have to answer.
Open sesame. That's magic.
Indeed.
What was the source of that quote?
I don't know.
That's your
A
homework.
movie.
That's your homework for next week. Find out.
Okay.
So if I think I know, I should just remain quiet.
I'll
You
call
can
you
whisper.
after that.
It shouldn't take. It's not that hard.
No, it's not that hard.
So the red magic. There's a lot of people who will say the red path is a Native American path. And that's partially correct, but that's a long ways from the whole story. The red magic is the rituals and the spiritual path associated with blood. Specifically with your blood.
Oh,
With
blood
bloodlines.
brothers.
No, not just blood brothers, bloodlines. So we all have a genetic lineage. Celtic, Viking, and barbarian. Yeah. So when I study Celtic history, when I study Celtic/Druid shamanism, I'm studying some of my bloodline. That's part of my red path, is the Celtic work, the Viking work. When I study the Celtic and the Nordic tree of life, their versions of it, that's part of my red path. It's also the path associated with women's monthly cycles. So the act of consciously creating a human offspring would be a magical act associated with the red path.
And that would still be kind of your lineage going forward.
Mhm. Yeah. So the red path is in some ways it's our core path, right? So the Toltec work, of course, isn't limited to one bloodline. It embraces all.
Mhm.
We had 5 continents worth here in our past studying the Toltec work. So yeah, the Toltec work would be part of a red path. Probably the most missed question.
Yeah. So since they had 5 continents of peoples, cultures, or more, they probably gathered all the higher learning from all and transcended that and made that's their knowings from all the cultures.
Yeah. And it's available. You just have to learn how to tap into it. Through meditation. It's all there. This is another reason why historians, well, the first reason historians don't like Toltecs is they didn't write anything down. They don't understand how to encode things in the artwork. The other reason is it wasn't encoded just in the physical plane, it was encoded in the higher planes. If you want to learn it, go to the higher planes. That's part of the consciousness work of the Toltecs, is we go to these higher planes not just for a cool psychedelic experience. We go there to learn. We go there because the information stored there, those libraries can't be burned.
There's probably a reason why they did that. So
Yeah, look what happened.
the first thing you said when you started the talk tonight is that there's a reason why, you know, why a lot of people don't know this knowledge because it could be misused.
It can be misused. Absolutely. And so
Or deliberately corrupted.
are deliberately corrupted. That's exactly why Bonnie might add to this when she gets back. But the Druids had purely an oral history. It was an oral history that was passed down, and you studied 20 years to become a bard in the Druidic system and learn the histories. You had to learn them from memory. Everything. And the way it was recited, it was all rhyme. Because it became much harder to corrupt it without somebody figuring it out.
So it was rap in the bird.
Yeah, it was kind of like rap, only like many thousands of years ago.
And the Bible is an oral tradition that follows that same metered rhythmic pattern. If you're reading it out loud, you'll hear it, and then you'll know right away when they've taken something out. Because it's like dun da 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 da, like there's something gone or added or mistranslated or whatever.
Yeah.
And but all of those oral traditions have that, because that's it's easy for us to remember the lyrics to a song, but if you try to memorize just anything, and it's more difficult.
Okay, so what you two are saying, so what does rhythm pay in this? By learning and accessing the secret traditions.
Okay, you lost me there.
Okay, there's a reason for the rhythm in ritual, in the Bibles, or the scriptures, or whatever. So the rhythm must be some kind of intention, or must call in some kind of like
I see what you're saying.
Like Cretan music is designed to raise the vibration.
Right, exactly. So the rhythms are chosen, or at least it is possible to choose a rhythm based in words and language that's transmitting a frequency.
Like Om Mani Padme Hum is a mantra, but there's a rhythm.
Right. So that's all true, what you just said. And the biggest thing I want to point out is when the Toltecs started hiding their work, it was well in advance of what they saw coming. And some of their great dreamers and seers saw the conquest coming. And then look what happened when the Spaniards got here. Between the priests and ignorant conquistadors, they basically burned well over 90% of all the documents they had. All those codices, they had libraries and libraries of Mayan documents, Aztec documents, and other cultures here, written records up in smoke. Out of the scraps of the fire, there was a few that a couple of priests put together and translated, and we have scraps. Kind of like the burning of the Library of Alexandria, right? We have scraps. And so that's why it's not, it's hidden, but not in plain sight. You have to work, you have to build your consciousness, and then you can go and you can learn from the higher planes.
But the rhythm must do something to our bodies, memory, ears, or something that when it's almost like the secret language is hidden in plain sight. Like you hear the rhythm and you know that's Toltec and that it's designed to take you someplace.
Think of it like, yes, I'm agreeing with you, and I'm not going to belabor the point, but like shamanic drumming, right?
Right.
It's 120 beats a minute.
Right.
And that interacts with our brainwaves in a particular way to facilitate taking our consciousness somewhere else.
I'm also thinking like of the banishment ritual, where you're addressing, the four names of God, the four directions, you're calling in the four archangels, and there's controversy as to whether you should be doing this in your own language or the language that the ritual was written in. But what's more important is the toning of it, to put it into a vibrational tone that is the frequency that's going out there. And so there is that vibration, and I really think that frequency thing is speaking to what you're talking about. There's transformative aspects that comes through with the vibration, and even specific words are going to have a specific vibration, and that's why it's so detrimental to just rip it out and put in a different language or a different word, that wasn't really intended. And we do that. It's like, because I know Shakespeare, so there's the Shakespeare for Dummies. Well, yeah, you may not understand the story and what's being said better, but it doesn't flow. It doesn't sound poetic. Because you're substituting in words that weren't the vibrational frequency that he intended. So they just don't have the same ambiance and the same heartfelt feeling that they would if you had used his words.
Yeah. So that's all true. So, of those four types of ritual, the four types of magic that we look at, and the Toltec needs to master. So something pertaining to your bloodline, whether it's a Toltec and or others. So we've studied Celtic, we studied a little bit of the Viking and whatnot. The most misunderstood is the black magic. Because everybody thinks, oh, that's Satanism, that's evil, that's communing with the dark side. You have to remember, we all have a dark side. And I would say that the first category of mastering the black magic that you must, in any legitimate spiritual system, is mastering your shadow self.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't look in those dark places, in those dark nooks and crannies that we don't talk about at dinner time in polite company, you will never master yourself. You have both good things and bad things stored in your shadow self.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are left over from previous lifetimes where it would be really easy and very fun to put heads on pikes. Especially if you're like me, who has conscious memories of being a barbarian warrior in many lifetimes and solving lots of problems by putting heads on pikes, or short term you think you are. You remember killing. You remember being killed, right? So you have to master that. And you have a conscious choice. If it hasn't happened yet, it will. You will have those dreaming experiences or visionary experiences where you are face to face with your shadow self.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to decide which path you're going to follow. That everyone has to do that. It's any of the processes you use to do things at night would be the dark magic. The times of day, times of seasons, not just the dark time of a single day, but the dark time of the year. You do something at winter solstice. That's as dark of a time of the year as it gets. That's, in some ways, black magic. That's black ritual. You have to come to grips with the yin-yang symbol and embrace all of it. You have to, the black magic, yeah, you can make a conscious choice to serve the dark side. That's what Darth Vader did, right? In the early Star Wars movies. He consciously chose to go there for a variety of reasons that we learned later in the later movies. You can allow yourself, and mostly it is an allowing, to be tricked into doing the dark work. Or from the Harry Potter example, there's the defense against the dark arts. You can't be a shaman and do battle with the dark unless you understand it. The key is understanding it without letting it seduce you. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You have to put your intent for this incarnation first. Now, if your intent is to serve as a bad example to others, okay, then you're choosing the dark path. But you have to be willing to go there. We all have certain things we have to do in order to accomplish that level of control. And you can't be afraid to look in the shadows. And this is one of the greatest failings of many New Age spiritual systems is they don't go there. They don't look.
Listeners.
Yeah. The white magic, the white ritual path. This is anything that has to do with purity or purification. Service in temples. Cleansing yourself. Renunciation. You can think of the act of nailing yourself to the cross as an act of purification and dedication. When you decide to groundhog it and you pick, this is a lifetime I'm going to do over and over until I get it right, that's part of your white path.
Sounds like kind of an altruistic path.
Well, they all should be altruistic.
Mm-hmm.
Is baptism white magic?
What are you being baptized into? I mean, you can be baptized into a satanic church. I would say that's probably not the white path. It's, baptism is a ritual and a sacrament. And it depends on who's doing it. Do they have authority to do it? And what is the commitment you make by that process? Being baptized by the Roman Catholic Church, it's like, well, that doesn't count much in most places. Now, there can be some very sincere priests performing the baptism. Then there's legitimate questions of, does the Roman Catholic Church even have the authority to baptize?
And the child is innocent.
Right.
The child doesn't have any choice.
Age 8 is considered in some religions to be the age of accountability. And that's when the baptisms occur. So the last area is the green magic. And this is associated with nature. It's many of the healing paths. So herbal medicine, plant spirit medicine, you say nutrition, farming and food production aspects of the Toltec work. I mean, you can't go through the 4 main tiers of the Toltec philosophy and line them up with this because, then there's health, and that's certainly part of the green magic. But then the whole thing is a red So yeah, everyone who's doing the Toltec work needs to have something that you're doing that's your green path and your red path, and something that's your black path, and something that's your white path. And that's personal. The ones that are mine aren't for anybody else. And so on. Bonnie's not for me. Her AVD work, I would say that's the part of her white path. That's an act of pure service to read and guide people through the labyrinth. She doesn't get paid, it costs her money, and other than the benefit she gets by, we were talking about with the Dalai Lama, learning and reciting that over and over and over again, which is a benefit to her. It's a pure path of dedication. Right? Now I am experiencing the clear light of objective reality, etc. That's, you don't have to write that down, that's in the ABD. That's the start of one of the major phrases. Paragraph 4, confronting the clear light. But all of those rituals, all of those things you're doing have to be done with an intent if they're going to be optimally effective. They have to be done awake. As awake as you know how to be at this point. That body of habits, when you find yourself repeating things blindly, that should be when you have that little tiny switch, that little trigger event that causes you to realize you're blindly repeating a habit. That's an opportunity to wake up. I think the cat just woke up.
I know, I'm afraid she's gonna rip the cords out.
Are there any questions?
There was a couple comments. I'm gonna type that in. Any questions? Just a few of the comments. I thought this one was interesting by Maria. She said that I read that the Bible. I read that the Bible thing, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," is a mistranslation from Greek. It was a poisoner, not a witch, that should not be suffered to live.
I hadn't heard that particular mistranslation, but when you go back to the earliest sources of the Bible, which was written in Aramaic, we actually have, in modern times, your Bibles that are a direct translation from that old Aramaic Bible into modern English. There's a book called the Peshitta, and it comes from a few of those teeny tiny pockets out in the middle of nowhere in the Middle East, where there are ancient, 2,000 years or so, little pockets of Christianity that have been using that same Peshitta for 2,000 years, and now that's been translated. And there's 10,000 differences between the Peshitta and the King James Version of the Bible. Some of them are extremely minor and almost irrelevant, but some of them are significant. Always versus never. Yes versus no. They've gone through, and some of the translations, they figured out that if you put a dot over a word, or under a word, or beside it somehow, one little dot changes, it reverses the meaning. Mm. It's like in mathematical, we have a symbol of not that, right? And so the pages were thin, and the dot could sometimes bleed through. And you'd come along if you weren't smart enough to say, oh yeah, that lines up, that wasn't a real dot, because the real dot would have been bigger. So yeah, there's lots of mistranslation, but that's interesting, that it was a poison.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
So can you
I like
spell, is it Peshita or
P-E-S-H-I-T-A. When we go offline, I'll show you. I have it.
Cool.
I think in the other room. It got moved. It used to be right here. Any other questions?
Well, then Melody had made a few comments, you know, seeming to remember being a keeper of records, that we all say, or that we saved all of Alexandria in the Upper Plains, that she remembers as it was burned, and then kind of using the biological instrument through or tuning our biological instrument through resonance. But she seems to remember many lifetimes of killing efficiently in order to defend a temple, and that kind of triggered some stuff for me as well. So the only real question, I guess, here at the end is Maria saying, I have a question. Are you going to change what we say in the meditation? It's becoming rot. I'm not familiar with the word, so I asked her about it. She says doing the same thing over and over again. Rote. Becoming rote to me, and I find myself thinking the words but not paying attention, and my mind wanders.
Yes. Okay, so thank you for that question. That's an example where I would say you're doing it because you feel you have to. And you are not putting your attention into it in that moment. And you would be better served to just take a day off and not do it than to do it poorly. But the fact that you caught that yourself and you knew that is a good sign. So what I do, because yeah, it can be rote and you're going through the motions for the sake of doing it, but change which word of each phrase you emphasize. Change the number of times you go through it, kind of randomly. Once. You know, instead of doing it 3 times, 9 times, whatever you want to do, or whatever you've been doing it, or don't do it, let's say, for a set period of time. Change it up by doing it once. Start with 1. Just 1 time. Because then that will carry, hopefully, to your mind and your consciousness the idea that you're only doing it once, so you better get it right. And speed can destroy ritual. And you can think of this meditation that we're doing as a ritual, because it is. So slow it down. Big pause before, once you get set, you're in, you're connected, you've got your world in your hand. Or you envision yourself standing over Mount Shasta. Pause before you start. And then pause between each phrase. And one time you could emphasize the first word. God lives. Or God lives. Don't just do it silently, mentally. Say it out loud. There is power in the speaking. put your Akadwa into your voice.
Mm.
Love is the answer. Or love is the answer. Love is the answer. We are all one. We are all one. We are all one. Vary it. Most days I hold the world in my hands, and I'll cycle through 3 times, usually 3 different ways, and then I will go over the mountain. And what I'm doing, as I explained once before, is I'm charging the mountain, and then I'm consciously connecting and sending that same message to each of the other major sites that we talked about. And, feel free to throw in some extra ones. Like, it's not official, but I throw in the Altai Mountains. In addition to Egypt, I throw in Mount Kilimanjaro. I just drew a blank. The island in the South Pacific in that one other book.
In the heart shape,
Yeah,
isn't it Moria?
Moria. I could throw in, there's a very powerful power center that I think was at one time part of Lemuria in the South Pacific called Moria. I do that one sometimes. And I don't always do all of them. I'll say today I'm doing Lake Titicaca, for example. And there's a lot of ways to change this and vary the process that will assist you in not having become a God is, love is the answer, we are one. God is, one is the answer, we are one. God is, love is the answer, we are one. Okay, good. Don't even do it in that case. Take a day off. But do it the same way the ABD readers are trained to connect with the essence of the person passing through the chambers, where whether or not they survive and succeed depends on the clarity of that connection and reading of this passage. Confronting the clear light. If they get that one instruction, the rest of the ABD is irrelevant because they've got it. If you're going to save the eternal essence of this being, and you put all your energy, all your consciousness from every plane into that one reading of that one paragraph, the message can get through and they can be saved. And then there's that knowledge that if you do that right, it's not just that person you're saving their eternal essence, it's yourself. So the purpose of this exercise is we are changing the consciousness, the collective consciousness of humanity. I meant, and I didn't have time to finish it today because today morphed, as days often do. There's the quote by Buckminster Fuller, and somebody out there will probably pull it up before we go offline here in a little bit, about, let me get the essence correct, and then you'll find it. It's something about we don't fix problems by focusing on the past problems. We simply focus on the new model and replace it. All the problems with horses and buggies weren't fixed by making better horses and better buggies. They were fixed by making the automobile. a completely different solution to our transportation problem. The problems with telegraphs and running wires everywhere weren't fixed by making better wire. They were fixed by making wireless telegraphs, i.e. radios, which nobody thought of until somebody invented a radio tube. And so on. The first person to invent a radio tube was
Edison? Not Edison. Radio.
who? Robert Goddard,
I would not have known that.
more famous for his rockets.
Mm.
And when RCA, the Radio Corporation of America, was being sued by Collins to break the monopoly they had on radio equipment, Collins found Goddard's patent buried in the patent office, and Goddard's patent was the key piece of evidence in a court case that broke the RCA monopoly on radio.
Mm.
Robert Goddard is the name. So, Maria, I hope that helps. That's what I'm doing, and feel free to be creative with the way you do that, and put your Akadwa and into it, and every day when you do that meditation, do it as if you were saving humanity, because that's exactly what we're endeavoring to do. Saving yourself, saving everyone you know, saving the planet. Any last comments or questions?
Just in the vein of her question, it dawned on me that it might not be a bad way to start our Monday night session with prayer as a group, a collective. I don't know if you want to give that some thought, or if
I'll give
people
it some
should
thought.
do it before we get here, but
I'll give it some thought.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
To do that, we'll need to make sure that we get her early so that we can start on time. But in the old days of Coyotes Tellings and everything before that started, we actually did consciousness exercises. So while we were waiting for it to start, we would do the contact exercise or different group things, which really helps kind of get us in the right place to receive the information that's coming through. So we certainly could talk about doing that kind of thing, but we'll want to meet a little earlier.
okay.
Yeah. I got your quote if you want it.
Oh, please.
So it's, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete.
There you go.
That's what
That's
Buckminster
beautiful.
Fuller said. I knew the essence of it, but I didn't have the quote. So we should find that and put it on the Golden Eagle Discourses Facebook
Okay.
feed.
Right.
A nice one. With a good picture of Bucky. I like Bucky.
Oh, okay. I've never even heard of it.
Oh,
Geodesic
he
domes.
was
Have
an
you ever heard of a
amazing
geodesic
architect,
dome?
Exactly.
He looked at a problem, which was, using his own advice, how he was looking at the efficiency of building design. And we have these huge structures designed then to support a covering and walls. And so he started exploring what would it look like if the covering and the walls were the supports for the structure.
Mm.
And that allowed him to enclose a huge space without any beams.
Mm.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was.
And
It
that's
was
just-
genius. That's Bucky Fuller.
Well, also too, that church in Florence, the Domo, that engineer-wise, they don't know how it's standing.
Which church?
It's the big, huge red dome.
In Florence, Italy?
Yeah,
Because I know that one of the things, and you all know how fond I am of the Romans, and you also know that I give credit where credit is due. And the Romans figured out how to build domes, and they basically developed reinforced steel concrete, and up at the upper sections of the domes, and I'm thinking of the one at, was it St. Peter's or wherever in Rome, but that would have, I can't remember which one. The upper portions, you'll know, you studied art and architecture.
I know, I'm pulling a blank.
It's
the Domo. If you bring up the Domo.
No. Wait, listen, hear me out. Is they made the concrete by using pumice.
Oh.
Pumice is this volcanic material that's rock that floats, right?
Mhm.
Because of its structure. So somehow they put pumice in the concrete, and they made the concrete lighter.
Pantheon. It's a pantheon.
The Pantheon. Okay. So anyway, they there's a lot of things that the Romans did well, and there's a lot of things in not just Rome, but in Egypt, in China, in India, even here, a lot here in the Americas we're finding, where we don't know how they did it. It was built with technology that we don't have, that we can't duplicate today. All right, I think we're going to end there.
Okay, there was one last question by Maria was, are you going to teach us defense against the dark arts?
Yes, next time you're out.
Come soon.
All right, thank you for watching. We'll see you next week. Keep doing your homework. Let me know when we're offline.
Will.